Do you smell smoke? I mumbled, groggy and disoriented, jerking upright in my bunk. Gray tendrils curled from the ceiling vents, and the ancient Cold War-era warning light blinked red in the corner. A siren, silent for decades, wailed to life above me. I thought we were under attack. I snatched my flashlight, yanked on my boots, and scrambled up the emergency ladder toward the surface, heart pounding, because in that moment, it really felt like my life depended on it. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I cracked open the camouflaged hatch and peeked out. A bulldozer loomed over my bunker. The ground above was torn uppity, reckless, like a botched first shave, guaranteed to leave scars. The machine's front end hovered inches from crushing my main air shaft. Workers in orange safety vests swarmed like ants, pouring concrete. I squinted at a banner flapping in the wind. Future site of Maple Grove HOA Community Hall, grand opening this Saturday. It hit me like a brick. The HOA, same one that once fined my neighbor for planting sunflowers too near the curb, had just overstepped. They'd bulldozed right over the line. I hauled myself out of the hatch and stormed across the lot, arms waving like a lunatic. A construction worker raised an eyebrow. "Whoa, where'd you come from?" I ignored him, demanding to speak to whoever was in charge. Right on cue, she appeared. Linda, sharp pixie cut, clipboard in one hand, iced vanilla latte in the other. She sized me up like I was a stray sock left under a motel couch. "Sir, you're trespassing on HOA-managed property," she said, her voice a polished blend of customer service bot and pure condescension. "Trespassing?" I choked out, pointing at the still-smoking emergency shaft. "You're trespassing. This is my land. That bunker's mine. The concrete you're pouring is sealing a shelter authorized by the federal government before this neighborhood even existed." Her eyes narrowed, but her smirk didn't budge. "That's funny," she said, "because our records show this lot is now shared community property. Your little hideout is history." I couldn't tell what stung more, her words or the way she sipped her overpriced coffee like she'd already won. I took a deep breath, biting back words that'd land me in cuffs. Instead, I turned and headed back to the hatch. As I climbed down, I heard a worker chuckle. "Guy lives underground like a gopher." The hatch clanged shut. Inside the bunker, I fired up the main console and opened the steel locker I hadn't touched in years. There they were, the original blueprints, stamped by the Department of Civil Defense. This bunker was part of a 1960s pilot program. While other kids played tag, I trailed my dad as he helped design these shelters. Years later, with my own federal engineering clearance, I'd built this one deeper, tougher, more advanced than any civilian model. A clause in the project charter preserved the land's status for 50 years after the program ended. I'd never thought I'd need it, but Linda just made it matter again. I scanned the documents and emailed my buddy Mark, who still worked in Federal Infrastructure Review. Subject line, "Urgent, we've got a problem." Attached the charter. Then I grabbed my tablet, pulled up the deed records, and checked the plot numbers. Sure enough, my name was still on the original zoning registry. I'd never sold the land. Linda's whole scheme hinged on a revised neighborhood plan, but she hadn't legally secured my parcel. It was a tiny mistake, but enough to bring her world crashing down. Next morning, I marched into the HOA office to protest the construction. Linda wasn't in, but her assistant, a jittery guy named Tim, sat at the desk. He went pale when I dropped the rolled-up blueprint tubes onto the counter with a thud. "What are these?" he stammered. I leaned in. "Evidence. Tell Linda the HOA just declared war on a federal facility." He gave a nervous laugh, but his trembling hands said he believed me. That afternoon, Linda called a special board meeting to address my complaint. They didn't invite me, naturally, but I slipped into the back row, quiet as a shadow. Linda launched into a speech about community progress, calling me an unregistered squatter on undeveloped land. She unveiled a new HOA map swallowing my plot into a communal green zone. Residents clapped politely, but a few looked puzzled. I waited until the open comment session, then stepped to the mic. "One question," I said. "When was this map updated?" Linda rolled her eyes. 3 months ago, voted by the board." I smiled. "And did the board see the original land deeds?" She opened her mouth, then hesitated. I pressed on. "Because county records show that land was never transferred." "The underground structure?" It's protected by federal emergency shelter laws. So not only did you build over an active asset, you might have just committed a felony by sealing it off. The room went dead silent. Linda's face drained of color. Tim dropped his pen. A board member whispered, "Is that true?" Linda fumbled with her papers, looking like she'd swallowed something sour. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "No one knew there was a shelter there." I held up a photo of an old aerial map showing the hatch. "Maybe you didn't look hard enough." I left before they could respond. Back home, Mark replied, "You weren't kidding. We flagged it. DHS will contact you in 72 hours. Stop any more concrete." I grinned. The HOA's big grand opening kicked off with a bounce house, a brass band, and enough smugness to choke on. Linda stood at the center in a neon green blazer, grinning like she'd just been elected mayor. "This," she declared, gesturing to the banner behind her, "is the future of Maple Grove, a place where community thrives and rules matter." I lingered at the crowd's edge, hat low. My bunker, now sealed under their shiny new floor, hummed quietly below. Its systems were back online, and one was about to steal the show. Halfway through Linda's ribbon-cutting speech, a low vibration rattled the stage. A deep thrum echoed, like far-off thunder. Linda froze, then laughed it off. "Old pipes," she said into the mic. "Guess we'll fix those too." The crowd chuckled, oblivious that the floor beneath them sat on a beast of steel and circuits, untouched for decades until now. The tremors grew. Then, with a grinding creak, a panel near the stage shifted. A puff of air hissed out as a hidden trapdoor under the fresh laminate popped open. Everyone turned. The fire marshal, standing at the back, frowned. Was this in the design? Linda blinked, thrown. "No, that's just a maintenance hatch." He didn't buy it. He marched over, clicked on his flashlight, and descended the narrow stairs into the heart of what they thought was just some weirdo's basement. Seconds passed. The crowd's murmurs grew. Then sirens blared, not local alarms, but deep, eerie ones from another era, warning of contamination and lockdown. They wailed through vents hidden in walls now part of Linda's fancy decor. The marshal reappeared, pale. "Shut this building down," he barked. "Now." Linda tried to interrupt, but he cut her off. "This isn't a storage room. It's a federal facility. You've built over a classified shelter. This could be federal obstruction." I didn't need to say a word. The crowd's silence was deafening. Some residents edged toward the exit. Linda, still clinging to control, snapped, "I demand to speak to your supervisor." The marshal's voice was ice. "You're about to speak to a lot more than my supervisor, ma'am." The crowd scattered, a mix of confusion and fear. I walked home, eyes on the news that night. Local outlets buzzed about an incident involving mysterious underground infrastructure at Maple Grove's Community Hall. They didn't know yet this was just the start. Next morning, a block number called. "Is this the owner of the Ironwood shelter?" the voice asked. I hadn't heard that code name in years. "Yes," I replied. "We're reactivating its status under federal continuity protocols. Expect field inspection teams within the week. You're authorized to prevent further obstruction or changes to the site." I leaned back. "Understood." I hung up, knowing my next move. That afternoon, I hit the county clerk's office and pulled every zoning document I could find. The HOA's new maps included my parcel, but they'd used a flawed digital overlay, missing the original paper map. Worse, they hadn't checked the subterranean footprint. They thought it was just surface land. They didn't know the shelter sprawled nearly half a block in every direction. I dug out my archives floor plans. They showed something Linda didn't know: a second entrance, hidden under the community garden on the east side of the HOA's property. I hadn't used it in over a decade, but it was about to come in handy. That evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Linda looked like she hadn't slept, her voice cracking as she called the incident a minor plumbing issue. But one board member had talked to the inspector and wasn't buying it. Tim, her assistant, fidgeted in the corner, clutching a DHS memo I'd anonymously sent to the authorities. It screamed federal classification, making it clear the HOA hadn't just broken zoning laws, they'd compromised a national asset. I stood in the back, hat low, waiting for the open floor. Linda tried to block me. "We won't let him speak," she said, voice shaking. "This man's harassed our board and threatened lawsuits." But residents, now sensing the truth, pushed back. One yelled, Let him talk. He warned us. I stepped to the mic. I warned you, I said calmly. You thought I was a crank, a loner with old blueprints. But what you built your precious hall over wasn't a hideout. It was a legacy built by engineers, protected by the government, maintained by someone who knew what they were doing. You poured concrete over a federal emergency shelter. That mistake's about to cost you everything. Linda groped for a comeback, but a board member cut in. Is it true the feds are involved? I nodded. You'll see just how involved when the next vehicle here isn't a residence SUV. It's got government plates and agents with field kits. The room went quiet. I walked out, leaving that truth to burn like a fuse. At the courthouse the next day, I brought a manila folder packed with the original zoning deeds, my land ownership papers, and Department of Civil Defense letters with federal seals that made clerks twitch. I wasn't asking, I was reclaiming. The HOA's claim on the community hall's land wasn't just shaky, it was non-existent. The clerk's indifference vanished when I slid the folder over and said I was filing for repossession under federal infrastructure protection guidelines. His eyes bugged out. He grabbed the phone. Within an hour, I sat across from a county supervisor, a land records officer, and a federal liaison who'd rolled up in an unmarked car. I walked them through it all. The shelter, the land never transferred, the HOA's botched permits, and photos of the hatch's hazard signs, still visible under Linda's prized flooring. I ended with, so what happens now? The federal rep, a sharp-eyed woman in a gray suit, said, we'll take it from here. I left quietly, no fanfare, but the tide had turned. That afternoon, Tim called, sounding like he was mid-panic attack. They're here, he whispered. Government people. They taped off the hall. Linda's freaking out. He paused. She says you faked the documents, but a board member checked the original title. I didn't reply. He kept going. I don't think she's gonna make it. The next day, Maple Grove woke to yellow caution tape around the community hall. A federal notice was nailed to the door, site under restricted inspection and classification review. No one knew exactly what it meant, but it sounded bad. Linda called it a temporary audit, but when a second team arrived with ground-penetrating radar and started scanning the garden, her mask slipped. She didn't know the second hatch lay under those flower beds, now in the feds' crosshairs. Inside the HOA boardroom, panic spread like a grease fire. Members turned on Linda. Why didn't you check the deeds? One snapped. Did you skip legal review? Another demanded. She threw out excuses blaming the planning office, old records, even me for staying quiet. But the more she talked, the less they listened. She'd ruled with fines and fear for years. Now her grip was crumbling. The knockout blow was an audio leak. At a closed-door meeting, Linda had ranted about that creepy bunker guy, admitting she'd redrawn community lines without approval. Tim, maybe out of guilt, sent it to a local reporter. The story hit the neighborhood app and X like lightning. Residents demanded her resignation. Some protested outside her house with signs like "Un-HOA our neighborhood" and "Free the bunker." I stayed silent, watching the dominoes I'd nudged topple. Behind the scenes, the feds now knew the bunker's full specs and the HOA's violations. I got clearance to reclaim surface land above the shelter. But I didn't want to raise the hall, not yet. I wanted them to squirm. I filed a motion, not just for repossession, but to offer the HOA a lease on the land they'd built on. The price was steep, the terms brutal: monthly federal inspections, fencing around both bunker hatches, and a public sign stating the hall was leased, not HOA-owned, under federal infrastructure rules. The board was floored. Linda refused to read it, but others saw my offer was their only shield from total loss. They voted without her and accepted. The hall was mine on paper, and every month, the HOA would cut a check to the guy they'd mocked as a recluse with a hole in the ground. Linda lost it. She stormed my property one afternoon, red-faced, yelling, "You think this is over? You think you've won?" I didn't bite. I just pointed to a new steel post by the sidewalk, bearing a sign, "Warning, federally leased continuity infrastructure property. Unauthorized access is a federal offense." She backed off, speechless. Tim quit the next day. Linda was ousted as chair and faced probes for document forgery, zoning fraud, and obstructing a federal facility. The board, desperate to save face, issued a public apology. I skipped their groveling ceremony. I was underground, testing the emergency comms and backup power cells, untouched for 20 years. They still worked, just like the truth, quiet, buried, and unstoppable when it surfaced. A week after the HOA signed my lease terms, things got quiet. Linda's absence from meetings didn't go unnoticed, and though the board acted like nothing had happened, the neighborhood felt the shift. Residents had tasted the truth and couldn't ignore it. The hall, once their pride, now bore red signs warning it sat on federal ground, with cameras on corners and sensors at both hatches. People steered clear. Parents kept kids away. HOA events moved to backyards and driveways. Their flagship became a ghost town, haunted by a bunker still alive beneath, where I sat by lantern light, sipping coffee, surrounded by steel. I didn't stop there. I called an old friend, Claire, who ran a preparedness group. Back in the day, we drilled emergency scenarios together. I offered her crew training space on land next to the hall, part of my original parcel the HOA forgot. Within days, the old dog park transformed. Where kids once tossed frisbees, there were tents, radios, and volunteers running mock disasters, earthquakes, blackouts, you name it. It was legal, protected, and drove the HOA nuts. Residents griped. Why are people in hazmat suits by the slide? Linda, no longer chair, tried rallying them online, petitioning to ban the group as a safety risk. She missed the point. It wasn't her land. Every inch was mine, and I had the papers to prove it. Then she overplayed her hand, hiring her brother's security firm to review safety on my land. 2 guards in tacky jackets strutted up, demanding IDs from the training crew. They didn't know the group had DHS clearance to secure the site during drills. One guard shoved into a tent and got a stun baton to the knee when he wouldn't leave. His buddy bolted. Linda arrived, screaming assault. I handed the sheriff an incident report and the legal docs proving their trespass. No charges for us, just a fine for her goons. The story exploded online. Ex-posts lit up. Some backed Linda, but most were done with her chaos. A local news headline read, HOA's prize hall becomes survivalist playground. The article quoted Claire, "We're here to prepare people, not start fights. But if you pave over a bunker, expect trouble." A photo caught Linda mid-rant at a protest, spawning brutal memes. The board caved, moving all meetings to a strip mall 2 miles away. The irony was Rickthe'd mocked me as the oddball. Now they were the exiles. I could have stopped, but I had one last play. I applied for a permit to host an annual preparedness fair on my land, a public event with food trucks, survival games, a climbing wall, and talks by firefighters and EMTs. The county greenlit it fast. The first Saturday, the field bloomed. Music played, kids tackled obstacle courses, volunteers taught first aid under a banner. Preparedness is power. Families came from beyond Maple Grove. News covered it. The HOA stayed away. Mid-event, DHS sent a sealed envelope, final authorization to control the shelter and remove any unsafe structures above it, plus clearance to expand with federal support. I held the papers, realizing I didn't just own the land, I owned everything on it. Next day, I walked to the hall, now hollow, paint peeling. I called a demolition crew and set a date. Linda, somehow hearing, showed up as the trucks rolled in. "You can't," she cried. "This is public property." I showed her the letter. "Not anymore." She begged. "Think of the neighborhood, the history." I paused, then said, "I am thinking of history. That's why it's coming down." As the excavators roared and concrete cracked, I didn't cheer. I stood in the shade, watching their arrogance crumble. When the dust settled, I planted a sign, "Emergency Resource Hub. Entry by authorization only." Clean, sharp, simple, just like the line they never should have crossed. The rubble of the HOA's dream piled neatly, ready for haul-off. The crew worked with precisiono-drama, just the steady erasure of every slab and nail. All that echoed was the clank of loaders scooping debris. I stood by the gate, calm washing over me. It wasn't just land I'd reclaim, it was peace, the quiet thrill of knowing the ground they tried to steal was mine again, fully. Linda vanished after the teardown. Word was she'd fled to a cousin's out of county while zoning fraud probes tightened. I didn't care, she was no threat now, just a warning tale of what happens when hubris meets something older, tougher, more prepared. The HOA board scrambled, issuing a newsletter with weasel words about administrative oversights and planning errors. The smugness was gone, replaced by a plea to move on. But the neighborhood remembered, and I made sure they did. Post-clearance, I brought in a trusted crew engineers and preparedness volunteers to revamp the shelter's surface access. We built reinforced stairwells, secure hatches, solar lights, and biometric locks. The hidden relic became an official emergency hub, stocked and monitored. It wasn't just a facelift, it was a statement. This land wasn't prey anymore, it was a stronghold. For the hub's quiet opening, I invited a few neighbors who'd stayed respectful, plus local first responders and feds who'd backed the reclamation. We stood on the cleared lot one morning, where Linda's empire once loomed. A podium sat by the main hatch, next to a stone plaque. When the ground is taken, dig deeper. I spoke briefly thanks, a nod to the shelter's roots, and a vow for its future. No HOA meddling, no petty rules, just a working emergency asset, guarded by law and grit. A breeze stirred the flags around us, and for the first time in ages, the neighborhood felt like it could breathe. The ripple came fast. The county emergency team partnered with me for monthly training. Schools brought kids to learn about air filters and water systems. A news segment, "The Man Who Outsmarted the HOA," framed me as a quiet hero turning a relic into a safety anchor. I shrugged off the hype, but liked that the story landed right. Then, a final surprise, a DHS letter designating the shelter a Tier 2 community emergency site, with funding and evacuation protocol status. I could grow increments, bigger drills, more reach. I held the paper, thinking how far we'd come since I'd climbed out to find a bulldozer on my roof. Some residents, Linda's old cronies, still muttered, saying I'd militarized the place. But their noise faded. The board had no fight left, and most folks were grateful. They brought snacks to training days, waved as I passed, asked about generators and radios. The neighborhood shifted, not by force, but because they saw what they'd once scoffed at was worth something. One afternoon, checking the hub's backup systems, I heard a voice behind me. It was Tim, looking lighter, free. We shook hands. "Thanks," he said. "I didn't know what I was in for with that job, but you showed me something." I nodded. "Sometimes you learn most when it all falls apart." He laughed and offered to help with the next drill. I said yes. The last piece came quietly. I walked to the back of the lot, to the second hatch under the old garden. Long forgotten, it was now secure, clean, with a new entrance. I descended, walked the tunnel to the main chamber. Lights hummed on. Everything was ready. I sat at the desk, opened the log, and wrote, "Facility secured. Land restored. Community steady. Let history note who dug first." I shut the book and leaned back. Above, the sun climbed, and for once, I wasn't hiding. I was part of something real, not a neighborhood of rules and ego, but one built on truth, strength, and respect. They tried to bury me, but they just showed me how deep my roots ran.